I'm out in Los Feliz today, which is a really cool neighborhood in LA that I've been meaning to spend more time in and shoot more, and I'm actually testing out a new film camera today. So this is the Olympus Pen EE3. There you go. This video is going to be about how to select your first film camera. So some of the things that I have learned, and hopefully I'll be able to give you a starting point to kind of decide what camera is right for you. And we'll also talk about some red flags and things that you might want to avoid as a beginner film photographer. But first things first, let's go take some photos. Before we jump into specifics about the cameras themselves, let's talk about where you buy film cameras. Flea markets and thrift stores are an option for sure, but unless you're pretty knowledgeable about the cameras already and you know what to look for to make sure that the light meter is working, that it's focusing properly, I would recommend staying away from flea markets just because your experience is going to vary greatly depending on how the camera was treated before, if it was thrown around or broken or whatever. So unless you know what to look for, I would avoid flea markets at first. Your other option is going to be camera stores. Those cameras are typically going to be more expensive, but they'll be checked and verified by the people who work there to make sure that everything's working properly, so that's an option as well. The third choice is to buy online. Personally, I've bought every film camera that I own through eBay, and I've had an overwhelmingly positive experience. I will say, again, it's going to vary, based on how the camera was treated before you owned it. And since we're dealing with cameras that are often 30, 40, 50 years old, there can be a lot that goes wrong. And in that same vein, I would just recommend that you spend somewhere in the $50 to $100 range on your first film camera. I mean, just nothing more than $100. You have to remember that even if you plan to shoot with this film camera for years and years and years, the film camera may have different ideas. It may only last for a roll, like the shutter might go out, the light meter might go out a couple rolls in. So for your first one, until you know what you're really looking for, I would recommend keeping it at $100 or less. So the first thing to consider with the actual camera itself is just how manual you want to get. So what do you want to have control over? Do you want a point and shoot that does all the work for you? It advances the film by itself, it focuses the lens for you, it does all of the exposure and handles everything all the time? Or do you want something where you're running the light meter, you are setting the aperture, the shutter speed, you're advancing the film yourself, you're focusing the lens? Like, do you want to be fully manual? There's a lot of middle ground there. There's cameras that have automatic settings but then still let you focus the lens. I would decide, do you want a point and shoot that does everything for you, or do you want a more traditional old school film camera where you're going to have to do everything yourself and learn that process? And that's up to you. Just something to consider before you get into it. Personally, where film is concerned, I don't want to have a lot of hassle. I like to walk around a lot of the time with a coffee in one hand and a camera in the other, so I've opted for cameras that have mostly automatic settings. I do have cameras that I have to focus myself, but yeah, the vast majority of like point and shoots, small point and shoots out there are gonna have at least some sort of electronic focusing, electronic exposure to help you out at first. Okay, and then the next thing to consider is batteries. So the reason I bring this up is because old film cameras oftentimes use batteries or were designed to use batteries that are no longer in production for whatever reason. So what people will do a lot of the time is, if you look at forums like Reddit, whatever, on the internet, people will find solutions basically where you can buy like a watch battery or something like that, and then use maybe a piece of cardboard or whatever to fill in the gap where the old battery that it used originally might have been slightly bigger or whatever. So you just need to be comfortable, scrolling through forums, figuring out how your camera works, setting it appropriately, and making the battery work, or using an external light meter or whatever it might be. Another thing to consider is, do you maybe want a half frame camera? So one of the downsides of shooting film these days is that the cost associated with buying the film and then getting it developed is significant, to say the least. So what you can get instead, if you're trying to keep costs as low as possible, is a half frame camera. And how a half frame camera works is it just takes, exactly like the name implies, half a frame, and so on a 36 exposure roll of film, you will end up with 72 plus some extras if you load the film carefully. Some labs do charge an extra fee to develop half frame rolls. The other thing to consider with half frames is, just like an APS-C digital camera that has a smaller sensor, you're getting less resolution, so to speak. If you're posting on Instagram, your website, whatever, it's not gonna matter. But if you are doing like professional paid work that you're hoping to print really large, half frame's probably not the answer for you. And then the last thing to consider is, do you want a rangefinder camera or do you want an SLR style camera? So my personal favorite is a rangefinder point and shoot fixed lens camera. It just keeps things really simple. This is an Olympus Trip 35 that I found on eBay for, I want to say like 70 bucks, and it's been great so far. It is a rangefinder, obviously, because the viewfinder is off to the side there and not on top. A single lens reflex camera has a viewfinder that looks down and actually through the lens, so from the top using a mirror, and then it looks through the lens. The rangefinder is off to the side, and then it shows you frame lines actually in the viewfinder to give you an idea of what you're shooting, what you're going to get in frame. SLRs do give you the option of changing out the lens, interchangeable lens. Rangefinders do the same thing. You just have to maybe consider finding the old lenses. May not be the easiest depending on what lens mount and system you're using. They're also a little bigger, take up a little more space, just like digital rangefinders and SLRs. It's kind of the same concept, but something to think of if you want the smallest possible package. Again, point shoot rangefinders are the way to go. This is a 35mm, and then this is a half frame, so they tend to be really, really small and take up just a very limited amount of space. Beyond that, that's really all I have. If you have any questions about any of the cameras that I own or any specific camera, I will do my best to help you out. Just drop it in the comments. I hope you found something in this video helpful. Again, if you do want to see the shots from today in Los Feliz, when I get these scans back from the lab, I will put together a little video and throw it up on the channel as well. So yeah, if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for it in a couple of weeks, and I will see you all in the next one.